On April 14th, 1865, a well-known actor by the name of John Wilkes Booth shot and killed the President of the United States, Abraham Lincoln. After jumping from the balcony and twisting his ankle on the stage, he declared in Latin, "Sic Semper Tyrannis," which in English means "thus ever to tyrants." Now, Booth, because history is written by the victors, has been vilified as being someone who was a Confederate, a slavery sympathizer, someone who was full of hate and anger towards a man who, according to history, Abraham Lincoln, was the one who freed the slaves and was a great and honorable man. Sic Semper Tyrannis, thus ever to tyrants. Why did Booth call Lincoln a tyrant? Was he? The answer is yes. Lincoln was the most tyrannical president to ever sit in that position. Nowadays, people talk about how the president is taking power. The current president, Obama, is now going against our constitutional rights. Bush, before him, went against our constitutional rights. They are nothing. And what they have done is nothing compared to what Abraham Lincoln did. There's a reason why. Your government wants you to believe that Abraham Lincoln was just a wonderful, honorable man. They want you to believe that because the truth of the matter is he was a dictator. And if you can accept what Lincoln did, then you can accept what any president does. To say that he was a war criminal puts it lightly. He was a horrible president. He is responsible for the deaths of 600,000 soldiers. Unnecessary deaths. It is become more acceptable nowadays for people to say that the war between the states was unnecessary. If Lincoln only responded to the South waging war against the North, then it would be a different matter. But he didn't. There is a reason why many Confederate-type Southerners refer to the Civil War as the War of Northern Aggression. Because it was. It was. And if you look at the history, if you truly look at it and don't just let yourself be indoctrinated by the government, you can see this. I decided to do this on President's Day, and of course, there's another president that's generally recognized, and that's George Washington. Now, a lot can be said about George Washington as far as his ability to rule. He certainly wasn't, as far as his presidency is concerned, he may not have been a glorious president, but in comparison, George Washington was a moral man. Washington did not like the office of the presidency, and neither do I. Quite frankly, I don't like the government, period. I don't think that we need government. But the office of the presidency to Washington was like electing a king. And as you can see from one president to another, it doesn't really matter who sits in this office. It leads itself, the office itself, leads itself to someone becoming a dictator. As it said, power corrupts. Absolute power, which is what the president is, absolute power corrupts absolutely. Now, what made Lincoln such a corrupt president? Well, let's start in the beginning. Before Lincoln actually became president, after he was elected, but he was still waiting to actually hold the office, the southern states started to take over federal forts in their own states. Those who had seceded from the Union started to take over different little forts that had been United States forts. Now, this occurred without a single shot being fired. And there was no problem. The forces that were defending those forts did not fight the Confederacy taking over these forts. They allowed it to happen. Then you had Fort Sumter, a very insignificant fort that once Lincoln was president, he decided to fight over because of a pissing contest. Had Lincoln allowed the Confederacy to just simply take Fort Sumter without a fight, of course this is hindsight, and hindsight is 20/20. But had Lincoln done that, the Confederacy would have crumbled within a few years. They would have come back hat in hand to the United States, begging to become back, to be part of the United States of America again. What is not just hindsight is that many of the people who was in Lincoln's cabinet advised him to allow the Confederacy to just go, not fight them. Had Lincoln done that, 600,000 soldiers, that's just the soldiers, would not have died. Untold masses of people who died thanks to the barbaric and cruel way that the Union Army treated the South. You gotta remember, people didn't care that much at that point about slavery. Lincoln himself didn't care. The idea, this illusion that somehow the Union Army was out there fighting to free the slaves is absolutely ridiculous. It has nothing to do with the facts of the war. Let me mention this, because most of my videos are about exposing the Christian church, exposing the Bible, and so on. So you may wonder why it is that I decided to do this about one of our presidents and talk about government. Well, here in the United States, there really is no distinction between God and country. And Abraham Lincoln has become an icon. He has become a demigod in people's mind. Yeah, as the Founding Fathers have as well, which is ridiculous. These were human beings. And there is not enough out there exposing this man for who he really was. Because people just love him, but they do not know the history of what he really did. And for me, for anyone to speak up against him is tantamount to speaking up against God himself, it seems like. Well, if I'm willing to speak up against Yahweh Jehovah, I sure as heck am willing to speak up against this man. After the war had started, Lincoln knew he'd screwed up. He knew it from the very beginning. After a year, people, if you don't know about the history of the Civil War, the South was winning the first 2 years, and with 1/4 the number of the Union Army, they were still winning. It's because they had brilliant tacticians, brilliant generals, and the North did not. After a year of this, after a year of fighting, Lincoln wrote in an open letter to Horace Greely, August 22nd, 1862. He wrote, "If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing all the slaves, I would do it. And if I could save it by freeing some and leaving others alone, I would also do that." Are these the words of someone who was so against slavery that he would do anything to destroy it? If I could save the Union without freeing any slave, I would do it. Folks, this war was not fought over slavery. It was fought over Abraham Lincoln and his own ego, because he did not want to go into history as the president that had the Union dissolved. And this is just as simple as that. This is a war that was fought over Abraham Lincoln's ego. All these people, these are real people. Just because they're numbers today, 150 years later, doesn't mean that these weren't real human beings. Let's talk about what he did. Let's talk about what Abraham Lincoln did during the war. First off, he suspended habeas corpus, which means that he could pick up anybody off the street, throw them in jail without any kind of trial, without a lawyer, and stick them in jail for as long as he wanted. This is completely unconstitutional. And people nowadays talk about how there are executive orders that the president could do this, but the president's not doing it right now. Lincoln did it. What else did he do? I'm just grazing the surface. I'll give you some links so that you could read for yourself just how bad this man was. He also instituted the draft. Do you think that the Union Army, towards the end of the war, after being drafted into going into this war, were all fire running and killing the Confederate troops, thinking in their mind, I just can't, it's just so wonderful that we are doing the righteous thing by trying to destroy slavery? It's just so funny how people look at the past as though it's like these people were so righteous and wonderful. What else did he do? What else did Lincoln do? Lincoln also instituted a blockade of the South. Now, what's that mean? Well, that means that any ship going in or trying to come out of the South would be stopped, which means any supplies, any food supplies to regular civilians, medicine, food, the things that people need to survive would have been stopped. Does that strike you as something that a good man would do? Because if things like this happen today, we would call it what it is. It's a war crime. Now, as far as Lincoln and his attitude towards what was then called the Negroes, his own quotes show you what he believed. When he was running against Stephen Douglas for Senate of Illinois, he also ran against Stephen Douglas for president later. On September 18th, 1858, this is a quote by Lincoln himself with regards to the black race. I am not, nor have ever been in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and black races. I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes, nor qualifying them to hold office, nor to intermarry with white people. And I will say in addition to this, that there is physical difference between the white and black races, which I believe will ever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior, and as much as any other man am in favor of having a superior position assigned to the white race. From this quote, does it appear that Lincoln would have been in favor of the 13th Amendment that granted the African American race the right to vote? Do you think that Lincoln would have supported it? According to this quote, he would not have. I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of making voters or jurors of Negroes. This idea that he was somehow a supporter and champion of the African American race is a bunch of hooey. It's a lie. It's another lie. The reason Lincoln is considered so great, and the reason why he is so put up on this pedestal, is that it gives your government an excuse. If they start taking your rights away, they can say, well, Lincoln did it. Lincoln did it. During World War I, the Germans were blockaded by the English. That's a war crime. Doesn't matter who does it, it's a war crime. And the English justified it by saying, Lincoln did it. I've really done nothing but scratch the surface here as far as what he did, as far as how he went completely against the Constitution. The Union Army destroyed the South, and people want to act as though it's some kind of joke for Southerners to even today have a problem with that. Well, they talk about the South being backwards. It wouldn't be backward if it wasn't for the fact that it was destroyed 150 years ago by the North. I have a unique perspective. I was born in the North and I was raised in the South. So, growing up, I was just as much into Lincoln being, a great man, and I thought that the idea that the Southerners always said that the war was not about slavery as being ridiculous until I went to college. I've taken a lot of history, including Civil War history. And yes, it was taken from the perspective of the South. But the thing is, everybody knows the perspective of the North. Everyone justifies what he did. There is no justification for it. There is no justification for it. Every year, we celebrate the birth of this man. Every year, we recognize this man. By the way, his Emancipation Proclamation didn't free a single slave. Look it up. Slavery continued in the border states, the states that Lincoln supported, the states that he supported in order to keep those border states happy. Kentucky, West Virginia, which he created, Arkansas, Missouri. Every year we celebrate this man. We celebrate his birth. Every year. Every year we are again reminded of what a great man he was. This is an indoctrination that is just as bad as anything else that you hear in the Christian church or in any of the other indoctrinations of Hail Almighty United States of America crap. He was a tyrant. He was a dictator. Sic Semper Tyrannis. Thus ever to tyrants. John Wilkes Booth made one mistake. One great mistake. He didn't kill Lincoln early enough. This is Entropy giving you a bit of a history lesson that maybe you didn't expect from me. Good evening, everyone, and please feel free to comment.